So again, this is a tournament where there are no easy games. Just about everyone in the tournament at least has a FIDE rating of 2000, so even though I lost my last two games, I don't get an easy pairing. I'm playing someone about my rating, actually my friend FIDE Master Sterling Bayaca, who I actually was staying with for the tournament, so it was a little bit awkward before the round. We were both doing a little bit of preparation, of course, we were in the same room, and what I basically decided to do was Sterling plays e4, and of course, my main move is c6. I usually play the Caro-Kann, but this game, to be honest, felt like doing something a little bit different, given that I have played a lot of games for Sterling in training games and whatnot, and I'm sort of familiar with what he does, and to be honest, especially after losing my game earlier today, I was a bit in tilt, and I wanted to play something a bit more dynamic, a bit more interesting than my regular Caro-Kann, and so I decided to go for g6, the modern defense. And this was partially because I knew the line that Sterling, or I was pretty sure the line Sterling was going to play, was this line of bishop d3, which is, it's not a bad line, but it's definitely not the most ambitious, and I had some specific ideas that I was interested in trying. So I played knight c6, which we actually had in the Blitz game like last year. We were playing online just for fun, and I think he played c3 that game, but okay, this time he plays, instead of c3, he just castles, and his idea is, if Sam, you take this, well, you're done, because bishop b5 check, discovered attack. Sure, you can attack my bishop, but you're losing your rook if you take that, so this is GG, and you have to go home. So most players would logically think then that means you have to play something like e5 or knight f6, but I was looking at some other ideas before the game, not wanting to settle for a normal position, and ended up deciding that if I had this position on the board, I would grab myself by the balls and play bishop takes d4, which looks like to many people a very suicidal move, because you know, we're often told when you think ahead of your bishop like this, you really don't want to give it up. And here I am, giving it up, basically the idea being that now there's no discovered checks winning a piece, of course, because my knight would just simply take it. But of course, this just seems incredibly absurd to play in this sort of fashion, because like, what the hell are you doing, right? You can't just give up your dark squared bishop like that. That is completely insane. But believe it or not, this actually is not that bad according to the computer. In fact, it's bishop takes d for one of the top computer choices in the position. And at worst, it's pretty much, assuming both sides play best, white is only slightly better. But this is a sort of position which I kind of wanted, where there's a very clear imbalance from the beginning, which is going to make the game double-edged. And so even though I am maybe taking a big risk, I felt that this would be a lot more interesting than maybe getting like one of these variations, which Sterling, I've seen him play many times before, and I wasn't really too interested in getting for this game. So that's why we had this position. And for example, I remember seeing one game, I remember Vladimir Fedoseev, like 2600 Grandmaster from Russia, playing this in like a title Tuesday game. I think like h3 happened, and one very interesting idea was actually he played like g5 in this position, and believe it or not, black is already better here, where we've consolidated on the dark squares. White can't break with f4, but okay, in the game Sterling decides to instead go for f4, basically establishing his intention of he wants to ram me down on the king side. I play c5, kind of establishing the knight a bit further on d4. He plays c3, kicking my knight away. I go backwards. I just want to briefly say that knight c3 was the top move according to the engine. So before the game, I spent some time looking at this, and basically the top move was f5, which, if I understand correctly, basically the intention is to stop white rather, from playing f5 themselves, opening lines like the bishop, for example, making it harder for them to really truly establish compensation for the pawn deficit. And even though it might look very risky playing in this sort of fashion, like moving the f pawn in front of your king, I have seen this sort of idea before, so I wasn't really too concerned, and I felt like, okay, definitely they still have some compensation, but it's not like I'm on the verge of losing just because I've moved my f-pawn or something like that. But okay, after c3, knight c6, he moves his queen to f3. By this point, I was well out of book, but you know, he spent 20 minutes or so to get to this point, so I was also feeling relatively good about that. But now I had to make a decision. What on earth am I going to do? Of course, I could just develop a knight maybe to f6, but there was a part of me that very much wanted to emulate the idea I saw in this line for playing the f5 break, and I realized after queen f3 that, you know, if I just play f5 immediately and take, queen h5 check happens, they win back the pawn. And I was briefly contemplating this for a bit, like maybe it's not that bad, I was sort of telling myself, but at the end of the day, I couldn't really convince myself that this was anything but kind of just crap. So I decided not to go for f5 immediately, but instead played a very strange looking move, knight h6, where my idea was now to prepare f5 with my knight protecting this square. And it was also very important that I concretely calculated that if my opponent did go f5 attacking my knight, that I have this move knight e5 forking this and this, so if they just like move their queen, I don't know, I will take, well actually sorry, I think I probably play knight hg4, yeah. So the point is simply that I am going to be able to reroute my knight back this way. Of course, if takes knight g4 happens, I'd be happy, but the concrete issue in this line is that they can play bishop takes h6, and okay, sure, I can grab a pawn on b2, but that looks very, very risky. I wouldn't want to bet my life on this one. Like bishop g7 at the very least, they take away our castling rights. I don't know. Definitely feels like something that I would not want to play in a real game. So yeah, f5 though, in general, like, okay, if you want to avoid getting the bishop hit, you could also go bishop b5 check. But after the takes and like moving the queen again, knight g4, we route it back to f6, and we are doing pretty okay in this position. Probably just a queen pawn up. Maybe we can even castle queenside. So that is why in the game Sterling did not bite on f5, allowing this knight e5 in, and instead played bishop b5. And to be honest, I didn't really get this move. In hindsight, maybe the idea was that he wanted to play f5 now and basically prepare, or stop rather, this knight e5 move for myself. But I just didn't really see how it stopped myself from playing f5, because I was thinking, for example, like if takes, pretty much any recapture on f5, let's say pawn takes now, that's why I actually played in the game, was a bit dangerous maybe, but the idea would basically be like, let's say f5 takes, if he does take this and like win back the pawn, well, now I go bishop d7, queen f3, and basically the arising position, what do we have? Well, we have a position where material might be equal, but white's king definitely is, I'm not sure, less safe than black's, but definitely let's say black is the one who's going to be attacking after we move a piece to c8, and then we go bishop c6. There's going to be a lot of pressure, which white on the other hand cannot say that they have in terms of attacking our king, which is why I was fairly confident going for this sort of f5 fin, even if they had played bishop b5. I just, like, to me, the absolute material count didn't really matter so much, because I felt they'd be making a very big concession by actually giving up that light squared bishop. I should also note that there were other ideas instead of playing f5, and even from going knight h6, I didn't even mention any alternatives. I could just develop my knight to f6, that is perfectly possible. The way to continue from here, like at least the engine suggests approach, slightly strange looking, but once like develop the bishop here, the queen c7, and long castles. I have to be honest, that wasn't really on my mind during the game, but yet again, I'm also not super familiar with these positions. In general, it was a bit of a risk, and like as a whole going for this whole line, that's also something I should say. There was a lot of attention from other people around this game, because they were like, what the hell is this kid doing, right? But knight c6, queen f3 again, knight h6, bishop b5, and I decided to go for the ballsy f5. I could also play f6. I actually didn't think about this during the game, but now looking at this at home, it does make a bit of sense as well, trying to like basically put the pawns on dark squares. After giving up the dark squared bishop, it's sort of like a somewhat of a strategic play, you could say there, but again, I for some reason just wasn't on my radar. I was thinking of really brute force stopping f5 like that, but maybe at this point wasn't even on his mind too much. But okay, it's what I did. Takes, and objectively best would have been to like take with a piece here. I have somewhat of an issue that I need to work on, where I need to stop basically running straight into fire. I've been very good at doing this my whole life, pretty much, where I underestimate a lot of danger. For some reason, I find it really fun and having my king completely open. And even though I play a lot of like fairly classical openings where this sort of thing doesn't happen, whenever I'm given the chance, for some reason, I love doing this sort of thing. And sometimes it can be good, but sometimes it can also be bad. In this case, it wasn't the best, but I wasn't really punished maybe the fullest extent, at least not right away, where the best, at least according to the engine, was queen h5 check, which looks logical, but after knight f7, I was like, okay, if you go bishop c4, I just go d5, what's the big deal? But apparently, if white just plays patiently with like knight d2, knight f3, like developing, it's actually very difficult apparently for black to really survive the position, something that, again, I was blissfully ignorant of, maybe you could say. Instead in the game, Sterling actually just moved the bishop back to c4, which is in a similar vein, trying to control this diagonal. I played e6, just trying to blunt it off. it turned out actually I could play knight g4, and this is a very logical idea, just trying to knock off the queen, and also in the event of h3, just reroute the knight back to a slightly more centralized square. Not a whole lot wrong you can do with a move like this, in my opinion. But okay, I went for e6, which was slightly suboptimal. Rook e1. Another interesting moment is the queen f6 move that I played, which looks very logical, defending the pawn like this. The engine also was not a big fan of, unfortunately. What the computer wanted to do, very interestingly enough, was to just play knight g4, completely ignoring the attack, and in fact it would be a mistake to take this. If you want to try and pause the video and find out why, I would suggest you do so. But the point is, we can be very cold-blooded, just play queen h4, we attack this and this, and they have no real business in that position, so maybe h3, and I think in this position the computer wants to just bring this back, and in the event they do take, they actually probably shouldn't, because after king d7 the rook's getting kicked out, and we're going to establish very nice play on the king side very soon. However, that was not really on my mind during the game. I must admit, I was like in a very robotic mode of like defend the pawn, when Sterling went into the tank a little bit, and after a bit of thinking came up with this move b4, which very much punishes everything that I've been doing so far very effectively. And this was a point in the game where I spent a lot of time, a lot more time than probably I should have, but it was for a good reason, where I was concerned in this position that, like, oh, if I just take this, he's going to play bishop b2, protect the bishop somehow, I'm not sure how right now, but eventually open this diagonal up and really make it show that I gave up my darks with bishop earlier, and that's going to kind of hurt. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out if like I could maybe avoid taking, so that it would be harder to open this diagonal. For example, I was also thinking like knight takes b4, taking this way, and that, you know, if he takes, maybe I could take that, but turns out this is very dangerous. During the game, I wasn't exactly sure like how bad this was concretely, but intuitively it felt very suspicious, and the computer confirmed this by saying that I am absolutely and completely busted in this position. And also if I try throwing like in between check, which I was thinking about a little bit, and take the c4 bishop instead, this is still very risky in this sort of position where, okay, like I am 2 pawns up, but like none of my pieces are developed, my king is in the center. It's really a very risky game that I am playing. So I didn't really trust knight takes b4. I also briefly contemplated something like bishop d7 with the idea that like takes, and maybe I can castle long and try and hope for a safe life. After bishop a3 though, I wasn't too impressed because I couldn't see a clear way to defend the pawn. And my kind of mindset was like, if they just win back the pawn, positionally I'm probably worse and I have nothing to show in that scenario, so I really want to try and hoard my material as best as possible. But I saw like if I played b6 for example, that this would run into bishop takes e6, well not check, I was about to say check. If I take it, this is a check, and I thought this was pretty much game over. As it turns out, it's maybe not that simple after king f7. Although after knight d2, the computer still says like white's a bit better, but it definitely wasn't as simple or as bad as I thought it was during the game, which is definitely interesting. It just goes to show that like these sorts of like weird positions, like they don't get more normal as time goes on, they just get weirder, and we're gonna see this throughout the game. So I ended up after 40 minutes and getting down to like almost close to 20 minutes on the clock, playing c takes b4. If I could go back like a month when I was playing this game and like visit myself at the time, I would slap myself in the face for spending 40 minutes, but I mean, you can't change the past, I guess. So okay, bishop b2 happens, and my plan here was bishop d7, when I tried to basically calculate from afar a lot of stuff, which is difficult to do because like there's so many different things white can do. For example, they can play rook e to defend the bishop like that, they can move their queen somewhere, they can play knight d2, rook b1, which to be honest I definitely underestimated, or maybe didn't even really fully consider. Though in the game we end up having queen f2, which I did not consider during the game. But the idea is of course very simple, they just want to play c takes b4 next, massacre me on this diagonal, and I of course do not want that. So I thought though that putting the queen on f2 was slightly odd. Queen e2 for example is a bit more natural, because on f2 like you make yourself vulnerable to knight g4 with tempo, so that's what I played. When after queen d2 I castled long, and this was sort of my idea from afar that I was going to do this, and if they play c takes b4 I'm going to go e5. I was even thinking of maybe playing queen h4 and sacking an exchange in some lines, not that they would take this immediately because then they would run into this, but rather like maybe g3 and then like that sort of ruins my plan of attacking this. And this exact thing I wasn't too impressed by, which is why I end up playing e5, blocking this diagonal. And as you can see, it is a complete shit show on the chessboard right now. I had no idea what was going on during the game. I didn't really believe in my position, to be honest, but I was like, well, you know, I don't know how I got here, but this is where I am. I just kind of have to make the most of it. As it turned out, like I mentioned earlier, white had a better move than queen f2. They could have gone to e2. Likewise, in this position, I actually could have really taken things over if I had played rook g8, gained my rook off this diagonal, now takes queen h4. And the point is, if they go g3 in this position, I can simply snap, at least I think this is the idea, knight takes h2. They cannot take my queen due to the pin. If they take this, rook takes g3 check, this, and it's pretty much game over for them. So what they probably have to do is instead h3, but with the very precise knight g5, and after takes, queen takes c4, picking that up with the geometrical idea that once a pawn disappears, the bishop hangs. Magic, I know that, and further continuing, this takes. This is just very difficult, basically, for white. Of course, black is also up a pawn, that helps. So in the event of something like this, if the queens do get exchanged, this is quite clearly just better. But okay, I was at a point where I burnt so much time earlier on move 14 thinking about this that I didn't leave a whole lot of time for myself to really contemplate these sorts of decisions. And so I just went for long castles after a few minutes and was like, okay, let's not try to be perfect, let's just play moves which are kind of good enough. But in a position like this where things are so double-edged and like you're sort of on a razor edge, so to speak, where one good move could like really turn things around, but likewise one bad move could completely subvert your position into like a dying hellhole. It wasn't exactly an ideal situation to be on the clock, of course. Okay, after some thinking though, Sterling played h3. I, without much thinking, played h5. Like, you have to understand, right? Like, this is not a position where I can retreat, right? If my knight's been attacked, I have to go h5 and basically say that, okay, let's go, buddy. If this is what you want, this is what you get. And fortunately here, h5 is kind of good because if they actually do take this, this is very suicidal. I'm going to go g3 and I'm going to slice the king's head off. But okay, he didn't do that because like that looks incredibly scary and is also not objectively good. He played knight a3 after some thinking. The time on the clock also has evened out a bit, which I was happy with, of course, because I spent way more time than necessary earlier on the whole c takes b4 thing, and the move 20 in an absolutely absurd looking position. It's basically become a rapid game where we both have 15 minutes on the clock. Again, not ideal. Okay, so I played queen h4 though, and basically again I'm looking to slice the king's head off. I want to go queen g3. I want to make something happen. If I don't do that, like, what do I do in this position? I don't know. So that's what I did. I went queen h4, plays knight b5, and in this position I was hesitant to continue through with my plan of queen g3 for a reason that might have actually just been a straight miscalculation. So this was like a month ago, so I could be misremembering, but I think I was concerned with queen takes d6, and I think Sterling also said something similar. So maybe we had the same hallucination where after you give a check on f2, now there's no further checks and you're just dead lost because you cannot stop the mate here. The problem is that you don't have to give a check on f2. You can give a check here, not there. That's terrible. But this one, and there's actually a repetition just like this, because if you go this way, you drop this with check and then everything falls like dominoes. So that pretty much left in this position not many other moves. I think Sterling mentioned something like bishop e8, but that's very ugly. I thought rook h6 was the most sensible one to stop this. However, like, that was actually, again, like a miscalculation. So why was this actually bad? So it actually was bad. It just wasn't for the reason that I thought it was, which is that after check apparently, and like takes, bishop d5 defending this. Sorry, I think it was actually b5 instead. And now if they just try and like completely go full steam ahead on the king side, we can actually very calmly dismantle with bishop d5 and king f1, I believe, when now notice the check doesn't go anywhere and somehow everything is just completely covered up. I don't know how, and I don't know if Sterling actually would have found all these moves, but objectively speaking, this is lost for black. Whether white could actually find this in the game, that's a different question. It's a lot of precise moves to string together. But okay, I went for rook h6 in the game with two ideas. One is to get my rook off, like, the hell off this diagonal. And the other was, again, stop this whole queen takes d6 thing, followed by queen c7 mate. And I was like, okay, if he plays knight takes d6 check, then I can probably take, go queen f2 check. Here, take, and maybe I'm not doing too badly, like takes for example, I get the open H file, who knows what the hell is going to happen. So what we had in the game was instead f takes e5, which turns out was a mistake. And on the next few moves, we basically just kept playing the worst moves possible. So instead, what was apparently best was just like rook ac1, calmly improving a piece and preparing to murder black. When f takes e5 apparently wasn't good for the reason that now, if you compare it to before, if black ever takes here, white just calmly takes, so it's not really a big deal. But the moment white takes that, you actually have to think, right, that black can now advance their pawn to f4, control that square, maybe even to f3, and really start breaking apart white's position. But for some reason, I thought I was smart, so I played knight takes here. And my idea was okay, the more pieces, the merrier. So let's bring another piece in. I can then bring the bishop to c6. Concretely, though, it doesn't quite work out like that in practice, where you can imagine, for example, if takes, that this is actually going to very soon end up just terrible, because I've sacrificed a bunch of pieces, but because everything came with check, basically, it doesn't work. And also, if I take this, I don't also think this really leads anywhere in particular. I can give a check, but I don't think that, because this isn't even working because the queen covers that square. So also bishop takes e5, not good for myself, because after d takes e5, knight e6 check, again there's this knight of 7 type stuff where my rooks get forked, and this is very problematic. However, okay, again, let's just go back a few moves, right? So f takes e5, horrible move according to the engine. Knight takes e5, even more horrible move. Sterling plays rook takes e5, which is an even more horrible move according to the computer. I take it, and now apparently things are equal, whatever the hell that means, followed by rook c1, which is also apparently another horrible move. I play king b8, apparently also another horrible move, and it turned out here that I completely overlooked. I was just I saw my rook, my king in the eye of the rook in the open file, I move it, and I completely overlooked the possibility here that I can take, and that after bishop takes b5, I think for some reason I missed that my queen was protecting the rook here, and at the very least I can go king b8, or even better, I could have gone rook c6 here and blocked the check like this, such that now if they take this, their queen is hanging. If they do this one, well, they're fucked. So yeah, that's what I could have done. I think my brain just was not in a good place. These are all excuses, of course, but it really highlights the importance of having good calculation, because I think before the tournament, I didn't work enough on that, and it was really showing in this game. We're on the knife's edge, and if you make one kind of slightly off move, you're gonna feel it, and I felt it after king b8, where now Sterling took this finally, but the problem here is that, now look, if I take this, bishop takes e5 is a check, and this is not going to be very good. At the very least, they can come here, take that, and yeah, I mean, these checks are going pretty much nowhere. So after h takes g4, I instead took this, and I was thinking for a second that maybe this isn't so bad, because after takes, my rook was of course hanging. Maybe I could play bishop takes c4, because takes, I get rook d1, so, and that is of course checkmate. So maybe I've equalized the material somehow. Maybe I'm out of the red, but then I realized at the end of this, they just get bishop f6, fork, and there's nothing I can do much about that. And I realized because I can't take the piece back, I'm probably screwed. I played bishop c6 with the hope that if bishop f6 takes, they can't take this because this is mate. Truth be told, even this can be saved with queen g5, but Sterling finished me off very quickly with just queen f6 instead, and he forks this and this. There's nothing much I can do. I resigned. A very tragic ending to the game, and definitely the craziest game I played the whole tournament. Definitely the craziest game I played in a while, and to be honest, this is going to sound like a very strange thing to say, but even though I lost this game, it was strangely enjoyable to play in a weird way, where because it was just so unlike the games that I usually play, which are definitely more tend to be a bit slower, more of a strategic nature, it was an incredibly thrilling experience. Sounds a bit weird, right? Where I'm playing this crazy dynamic chess with all this crazy stuff happening on the board, both sides are going for each other's throat. I really enjoyed it again, in a strange way, and it made me think how can I get more games like this? And definitely one way is to really play openings such as the modern defense, which have that sort of inherent double-edged nature in them. Of course, I was not happy, of course, that I lost this. But one of the crazy things was, I have to say, was that during the game, like, I truly felt after bishop d7, like, after this whole b4 thing, psychologically, I felt like I was kind of in trouble, and it was kind of difficult, I think, to look past that and then find moves that were actually good for myself, because I didn't really inherently believe in my position. But it's funny how looking at the game afterwards with a computer, like, it points out many different opportunities that I actually had, and I actually kind of felt this after the game, that, you know, my position was definitely very sketchy, but somewhere, somehow, I felt like I had some chances, and it was good to see actually that my instinct was correct. It's just that the chances were all like at places that, to be honest, I didn't expect. But okay, yeah, at this point in the tournament, I was on 3.5 out of 8 now. I'd lost 3 games in a row after winning 3 games prior before that, and that 3.5 score out of 5, which I thought was really good, now turned into 3.5 out of 8, which of course I was not happy with. But there was still hope in the last day that if I won, I could at least score 50%, not go home like absolutely ashamed of myself. And yeah, anyways, that's going to be in the next video though. Hope you guys enjoyed this, found it useful. If you did, like the video. Also, if you're interested in coaching and improving your own game, I have a link in the description below. And other stuff, join Discord if you're interested. Come talk to the guys in there. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, anyways, catch you guys later. Have a good one.